Wake up and deliver.
For some reason, I lost John, and just nobody was there anymore.
I know. It kicked me out. I was like, okay, cool. Thanks, LinkedIn. I was like, all right. Something went wrong. Hit refresh. No.
No, it wasn't working. Well,
wasn't.
Welcome to another Wake Up and Deliver, episode 13.
13.
I thought, did you create that sound for us? Wake up and deliver, whatever it was.
Well, I have the original sound, but I still can't get to playing it. I still can't get to playing it when we're live. So that's my next rabbit hole that I don't really want to get into right now, but
fair enough. All right, as always, we're going to start off with some Brain Coffee. As always, I always think they're great. John, not so much, but let's see what he thinks of this one this morning. So, vision without action is merely a dream. Action without vision just passes the time. Vision with action can change the world.
isn't that the same as last week? Or almost the same as last week?
Whoa! I find these nuggets, and you're just saying I'm just repeating myself. This is not good.
I'm just saying that one sounds very similar. I think look, I mean, I agree. I think you get me with most of them. I'm like, yeah, I agree. These are some pretty tried and tested pieces of advice usually,
Usually, but you're starting to repeat yourself, Matt.
No, wow. I'm just maybe we'll go back to the tapes and we'll have to see what last week was about.
Last week was the most powerful person in the world is the storyteller, I think I said.
Then maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Either way.
Maybe. Anyways, let's get started on this. So it's a busy week for everybody. So John, and I've always want to bring up the latest and greatest, and we always want conversations for people to raise their hands and come up and chat with us if you have something to say. If you don't, as always, kind of listen along. This week, I think we have some interesting content. John kind of picked out some cool stories that we've come across. John, you want to take us away?
Well, the first one was something that Bill had brought up, right? And it was an extension of some stuff that we talked about last week. And you did a number of pretty solid posts about different types of things going on in the industry. And one of them is about rates and greenwashing especially. And Bill was asking, with everything going on and some of the challenges, especially around sustainability and the costs and cost increases, right? Because that's what most people don't think about, is that typically being more sustainable has a tendency to be more expensive. He asked, how do you keep rates sustainable with everything going on in the market right now?
I don't think you can keep rates sustainable. That's part of the cost until there's a saturation of it, until there's more people doing it. It's unsustainable unless there's an increased pay or a what's it called, a government subsidy or a company subsidy behind it, until it becomes sustainable and there's more people on that aspect of it. But for the most part, like you said, if I'm adapting a new technology, A, it costs money, B, there's more costs associated with it, so you're not getting the best price if you're hiring someone more sustainable. It's more of a long-term strategy, I think, at that point, and we can't look at it as a short-term strategy.
Yeah, I agree. I'm probably I've got a bit of an unpopular opinion when it comes to sustainability, in the sense of everybody wants it and no one will pay for it, and sooner or later it'll just become the norm anyway, and it won't be a differentiator. So all of the EV guys that reach out to me and stuff, they hate that take, but because they all try to convince that it's some wild differentiator. But I think, realistically, companies are just going to get it done. And unfortunately, the real pressure in the market is going to come because the big guys can do it. Like Amazon already hit their sustainability goals that they had put in place for 2030. Walmart's well on their way. Like, the big companies that can kind of force a different paradigm aren't having any issues. It's the smaller people that, what's sustainability when 90% of the industry is like 10 trucks or less?
Yeah. Well, I mean, but that's the whole idea, right? To push that sustainability onto those bigger companies, to push them to adapt it early, because someone like Walmart and Amazon adopts it, everybody else is going to follow suit quite quickly after, right? And you want these megacorps to do it first, and then you need that subsidy in there, and they have this gluttony in there that they look for these subsidies to help become more profitable as well, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense that they've already hit their goals. I think it makes sense.
Yeah, no, for sure. So I thought that was interesting though when you're talking about it, because but okay, so if we so sustainability is one thing, but then rates become, another thing. And how do you keep rates sustainable in that kind of transaction? And I think the biggest challenge is, and probably what nobody would want to hear, is the fact that rates being sustainable is highly relative, like very relative, because sustainable for one company is unsustainable for the next. I think you and I talked about it when we were talking about backhauls and stuff. It's like some companies have a book of business that sustainable is a significantly lower bar for them than it will be for Bob's Delivery, for example. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, John. That's a great question. I think that specific companies that have a niche for it, have a specific lane that can tap into that more sustainable rate, should look out for other companies that would match that kind of profile for them to help them get that rate to that place where they need to be and make it sustainable for all. But I think a lot of people are running sustainability green, kind of covering it up to get some customers, but they're really not running profitable. They just need those lanes, right? Mm-hmm. And I noticed this with a lot smaller companies where they have all these green programs, but they don't know how to tap into some of the additional funding that they can get from it, and they're not running sustainably. They always say, "Oh, I'm not. I bought these skirts for my trailers. I'm not saving that much more on it." Where I know the bigger guys that do run this, the side skirts and help, they save a shit ton of money because they're tapping into a whole bunch of different areas of money back, and they have that green sustainability. So it also depends on your team's ability to capture that sustainability quota or that sustainability number, and then be able to kind of push it back. And then it's also a different lifestyle too, like how you're running your truck, or how fast you're running. Even back, I know I always like talking about, but the right turns that I think was the UPS that did it back in the day, that only take right turns will save a lot of money. Oh, it's the same thing. Until it becomes a part of that SOP. It's very hard to kind of realize how much money you're saving if long as someone's doing the calculation and running it. Another interesting one I just recently read to talk about this was American Airlines in the 90s. They had a CEO that was very frugal. Like he was obsessed with frugality. And he wanted to get as
sounds like
cheap
he'd
as
be
possible.
very, very popular these days.
Yeah. And so he was trying to figure out like where can he save. So he looked at olives. He focused in on olives in first class, and he noticed that was the number one food that people weren't eating. So everybody got 4 olives at first, and then he found out that if he took away 1 olive, and he would save on weight, funny enough, over time, and nobody complained about it. So the people who didn't eat the olives didn't complain because they didn't care. The ones who did eat the olives, it didn't matter to them because they still had 3 olives. They didn't care if it was 3 or 4. They didn't notice the difference. Apparently, he saved them like thousands upon thousands of dollars over the year, because of that small aspect of changing like these little things and tracking that over time.
Oh,
I think that
big time.
Yeah, and I think the same thing goes over sustainability aspect of it. Everybody looks at the short-term gain or goal of it, and they don't have the ability to kind of track it over time to see how much they're going to save in the long term when things are more in that arena of green sustainability, because it's moving that way very quickly. Like I was in the U.S. just over the weekend, and the amount of cars I'm seeing that are electric out there, it is far more than you see in Canada for sure. And I find that very interesting for Americans, because you always think that they love their gas trucks and gas cars, but the amount of electric spots to charge your cars and do all that is crazy. We don't have the infrastructure in Canada.
Yeah, we definitely don't have it. I mean, Americans often benefit too from a better base salary. You know what I mean, compared to what we get. But yeah, I agree. I think that there is a lot of shifting, and the details matter. I think I've told you this before, but like I still remember one of the biggest projects I did in terms of a large scale network transformation, and like I showed people that the difference between a 15-minute average and a 15-minute and 30-second average was $300,000 a year. And people were like blown away. And I'm like, yeah, so those, conversations here, there, like those little stops, like, thinking it's no big deal, literally costing us hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. Most people do not respect 30 seconds. They don't even think about it. And the same thing, you're right, on the sustainability side, when you're doing any kind of calculation, is that there's tons of value, and this is where these huge organizations like the Walmarts and the Amazons and whoever else benefit a lot, is that they take all of those little aggregate wins and they just keep stacking them, and then people wonder why Walmart's posting the numbers that they released like a week and a half ago or whatever it was.
Yeah. No, yeah, I agree. I think that we should pivot, though, John. I think we should pivot. Do a quick pivot to the because I found it very interesting to the company one that you were talking about startups, and there's no value in that small SME piece. Man. I thought you sent that over. That was quite interesting. Can you kind of explain that one?
It's like sometimes first. Like I'm glad we don't link everybody, because like that guy just seemed arrogant AF. Like I was like, what? Okay, so that video starts, and the first thing is like, it's like, if you're a business that's $5 or $10 million, he says 5, but his general difference is 5 million to $1 billion. So I don't think he's got a lot of love anywhere on that quote unquote lower end of the scale. But he's basically like, that's kind of a waste of time business. Don't go for funding. Like nobody needs these businesses. Like I'm just like blown away. I'm like, who thinks that like a business with 5, 10, 15, 20 million dollars in revenue is just like not interesting? I really think it's dangerous. And Bill, this is another thing made me think about, just as we knew we were going to talk about, sustainability and the rates and things like that. A world where people think unless you're doing $1 billion plus a year means that you're insignificant, you're some small player, you're not going to get the right attention, like, to me is mind-blowing. Like, and I think it actually sets some really bad expectations on the other side, because how much innovation and how much creativity and legitimate improvements are people maybe not going to get into because they're like, well, that's only a $20 million a year business or a $30 million a year business. So since it can't go to unicorn status, I'm not going to do it. Like, I personally don't believe there are that many unicorn level problems still out there. And I think that these VCs love their valuations more just because it's like, it's better than playing the stock. Like they get to play their own stock market and create their own value and then cash out at the end. So to me, I was just blown away. I thought that was insane, especially for the work that we do and how many small businesses are out there, and just how much of a positive impact that they have day in and day out on the world.
Well, you just think about in our space alone, like our space, logistics and supply chain hasn't had that tech rush like other industries had until COVID time. And the amount of new technologies that came out that are so beneficial, that are improving everything, and a whole bunch of them that failed or got bought out, and they are all in that 5 million and under aspect until they did blow up and become part of what we need, is amazing. Like, we talk a lot about aggregate, what's it called, last mile LTL companies, that we didn't really have that, 5, 6, 7 years ago. They weren't that prevalent. People didn't know about them. And now they're becoming more part of that strategy that people are having. Like, how can I save money with FedEx or UPS? And I have these programs in the softwares, and there's these little niche, small problem-solving companies out there. I agree with you. I think that these 5 million and under VC-funded companies are very much needed. But they're not.
But that's what he's saying. He's saying VCs don't want to fund that. It's like, unless it's $1 billion, they don't want to fund it. So it's like, kind of figure it out on your own. Which I was like, that's crazy. But I also know that's true, because I'm working with a number of like startups and stuff like that, and the amount of time spent being like, how do we show the TAM and that it's $1 billion problem and that we're solving something that no one's ever thought about is wild to me. It's like, are you walking around day in and day out like with this thing that you're like, wow, if someone would just pick up the $3-4 billion of opportunity here, the world would be a better place. Like, I really think these valuations are creating a negative impact on improvements and people really investing in things that would have a very positive contribution, but yeah, may not have the the wild VC sort of payback where they want to get 10x their returns.
Yeah, and as always, anybody that wants to kind of join the conversation, do raise your hand. We'll invite you up, and we can always love to hear everybody else's opinion. It doesn't have to be about John and myself, and we want to include anybody that wants to chat about the topic or change the
Or
topic.
any
about
new
something they
topics.
want
Yeah, change the topic too. I wish we could put a banner on this thing being like "Step up whenever you want." Like,
wake up and step up.
Yeah, wake up, step up, grab the mic,
No, but
whatever
but
it is.
But even on that, I think there's a lot of investment, and going back to your thing, there's a lot of investment interest, not even from major big VC out there, but even smaller guys that are in the industry that want to invest in it, and even companies that are, or can't solve the problem on their own, but they're willing to put up some capital to get someone to work on that problem because they don't have that horsepower. And I think there's a lot of that happening. And you see a lot of these little companies that you haven't heard of that they're working on problems in the background, and you chat with them and they're like, oh, I've solved this, this company hired me to solve this problem for them, and we've solved it, and now we're able to digress and go to other companies, and we're really building a lot of great traction. So I think, I don't think if it's the VCs, everybody's looking for that glamorous VC. I think there's a lot of VCs out there that are willing to invest under that $5 million company and make it more glamorous, but again, it's still going to be an unsung hero that nobody knows about until very much down the road.
Yeah, I think personally, I'm probably a little bit more pessimistic with it. I think they'll only invest if they see a big sort of ramp potential. Not saying that they'll only invest if someone's got a really fast path to it, but I don't think you're seeing as much interest or flexibility if they don't really see the ramp. And unfortunately, that's why I think we see so many essentially like copycat services, like how many platforms, how many aggregators, like how many matchmakers, how many different sort of connection platforms are all there, because they all lean on the same thing, like, oh, what's the total addressable market, like, oh, how big is my segment of the market, whatever. And they play with these $1 trillion industries to get $1 billion opportunities so that they can say that, oh, they just need 5%, 10%, whatever it is. And that's why I just think we're seeing so many similar services out there. Like, I have sometimes these investors reach out and be like, hey, can you give us your feedback on this platform or whatever else? And I'm like, okay, it's the same as, unless I'm missing something that you haven't shared, it's like the same as X, Y, and Z that's already out there. I said they have a nice UI, they have this. I'm sure maybe their algorithm might be a little bit better, but is it that much better? I don't know. Like, that's hard to get under the hood. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just really, and then just making everything about some kind of big tech or big sales or big this, when, there's still a lot of physical stuff that has to happen. There's either infrastructure or this, because at some point someone has to have the assets, someone has to make the stuff, someone has to be able to get it to the customer. But everyone just talks about like the things that are these huge opportunities, because those are the things that typically SaaS will go after, because it's the easiest to, I say easiest to scale, and I'm not being that like disrespectful, but I just mean you need a lot less input once the development, the R&D and the tech is built to continue to scale it, right? Servers and computing power and storage and all of that stuff.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, let's talk about the CPCN strike. We talked about last week. I predicted, they're gonna come to a resolution at midnight. I was wrong. They went on strike, and then the government came in and said, we're forcing you back to work. Do you think it's going to set the tone for other labor disputes? Because we know there's the port the ports are going to come up soon. Air Canada's pilots are coming up soon. We have a lot of labor disputes. I think this year's theme has been labor disputes all around.
Well, are you surprised after years of like 5%, 6%, 7% inflation?
No, I'm not surprised.
You know what I mean? And realistically, a lot of those jobs have been getting harder in the sense that fewer people want to go into them. So, you're getting people that are, probably a smaller overall base that does more overtime, that does harder work, that's also dealing with a lot of change. The CP thing, your question, by the way, that was great. I mean, you took a big stab with the political stuff, like putting the PM up there, and that's always it's always suspect. I hate the political stuff. Tried to stay away from it like a plague. But anyways, really good. I like that, and that was a good question. Like, what would you do? And I think it's such a bad decision, because the only thing that's going to really hurt and probably incentivize a better outcome from other industries, whether it be Air Canada, whether it be the docks, whether it be whatever, is if the binding arbitration pins CP. Like that's the only way that that probably has a quote unquote favorable impact, because if it ends up being a weak kind of resolution, if it becomes something that's more in line with what CP was offering, that obviously the workers didn't want to accept, I don't think that becomes positive, and I think it becomes a really challenging situation, because they're saying that, hey, we're not happy with these conditions. We don't feel that this is okay. We don't want to work this way. So then to have a bad agreement thrust on them for 3, 5, 7 years, whatever it could be, is tough. On the flip side, if CP gets pinned by arbitration, that obviously has a really potential negative impact on the market as well, right? I think everyone saw, and you made some great comments about how integrated the rail is and how big of a bet it is. And funny enough, I saw something really interesting that was like, Bill Gates has the majority of his investment dollars in 4 things, and one of them was rail. In Canada, actually, oddly enough.
Well, because CP and CN are one of the largest in North America, because they've slowly bought up a whole bunch of little regional ones in the U.S. to help do a Mexico to Canada kind of solution, and it is very impactful on the supply chain and the challenge. I agree with you. If they do an arbitrary back and it's more pro CPCN, I think it's going to bolden a lot of companies to push, because they know the government will side with them and they'll get favorable resolutions. If it goes the other way and then they go CPCN more towards the Teamsters, I think companies will be quicker to have a resolution before it goes to binding resolution, and we wouldn't have this disruption. I don't know if people would agree with that statement, but I can see the company seeing that in that fashion, because hey, if I'm going to get forced upon something by legislation and I look like the bad guy, I want to make sure I get out of the spotlight pretty quickly and I don't have that sediment. And I think a lot of companies are looking at this right now, at this resolution, and seeing, we've had months, because this was supposed to happen months ago. We pushed it off. The weekend before Labor Day, week before Q4, we're having a huge supply chain challenge in North America, because this affects both cross borders. Mm-hmm. And they don't have a resolution. They need to come up with something quick, because it's costing a lot of money and a lot of headaches throughout the whole system.
Oh yeah, big time. So I don't know. It'll be interesting. I know we're under the last 10 minutes, so kind of curious. Last night I was surprised, and just to tie it in, since we're talking about the infrastructure, these models, prices, inflation, and arbitration, unions, all of this. You see that thing I posted last night about Uber in New Zealand?
No, I missed it. Tell me about it.
So back in 2022, these 4 drivers from Uber basically sued them, saying, hey, we're employees, not ICs, not contractors. And they won, actually, in New Zealand. And Uber had been appealing it and not dealing with them. Adrian wants to come up. And anyways, yesterday, the court, the appeals court was like, nah, we don't agree with you, Uber. We're still siding with these 4 drivers. So really big case. It's going to push it to New Zealand Supreme Court for them to challenge, whether their gig workers are in fact employees or not. But I just really interesting turn of events, because that's obviously come up in California and stuff like that. In my newsletter, I had said like, they got away from it because of these measures of control and whatever. And the New Zealand appeal court was like, no. You are like employees. You can't negotiate. You have limited opportunity with your ability to generate other business. You can't discuss rates or revenue. When you're signed in with Uber, you're following all of their rules. So basically saying that just because people can sign in and sign out isn't enough. So that was a massive hit. And Uber's like, oh, well, we're not going to change our model at the moment, but I can guarantee you that if they lose that New Zealand Supreme Court case, Uber is done in New Zealand, Australia, and I'm very curious to see if it carries over into Europe at all. Adrian, what's going on? You jumped up, joining us, I think, for the first time, actually.
Yes, welcome.
Thanks for having me. It reminded me when you said about Uber and the contractors. I just saw somebody else, I think Amazon, they're having the same issue with some of their DSPs are saying, hey, we're not really contractors, we're employees. And it's kind of funny because as much as Amazon, kind of replicated their model from FedEx Ground, they took into account FedEx Ground's big woes when their contractors said, hey, FedEx Ground is treating us like employees too.
Yeah.
So even though you can take all these measures to avoid whatever happened to FedEx Ground, it's only a matter of time before it comes back to roost if you have that model, no matter which company it is.
Well, the challenge with it, though, is that whether it's FedEx, Amazon, any regional, it won't matter, is that if you really want to crank the dial, and you're an optimization guy, warehouse and everything like that, and if you really want to crank the dial, where do you get so much of your benefits from the warehouse environment, from the manufacturing environment? It's from control. It's from having control of the machines, it's having control of the flow, it's from having control of the space, everything. For Amazon or anyone else to do that, they get the same thing by controlling as much as they can the run. How many stops, what type of packages, how they're like. Amazon literally will like even differentiate, being like, these packages go to their little bins, these ones are their overflow, and all kinds of stuff. They list the stops, they list the rates, they enforce the rates to the DSPs, they give them flat rates for this program, and then they just pay a little bit of a insignificant bonus on a package performance basis. But they control the whole thing. So these 3,500 DSPs that are all they're all quote unquote independent contractors, right? That they're contracted with Amazon, but that's all they do. And funny enough, when I was in Toronto a couple of weeks ago, the program's up here, I met with a number of people that are doing the same kind of thing. And honestly, it is so taxing and so dedicated that they're like, hey, we do this business and we also have the Amazon stuff. We do this and we also have the Amazon stuff. I'm like, well, where's the Amazon stuff? They're like, well, no, it's all over there. It stays over there. The drivers stay over there. It really is, it's given them a lot of benefits, but to your point, it's got now its challenges because of how much control they have to put into the system to get that peak performance and lowest costs and highest efficiency.
So when does it differentiate from you being a contractor worker versus an employee? What's the distinguishing thing, you think? That's for both of you, Adrian and John.
Well, there's a few things. Usually, like control, how much control you have of your day or like the work is a big one. Your ability to influence the rates, like to negotiate and have some type of equality in the bargaining process. It's probably better if you're the company, if the IC essentially can't work a full-time lifestyle just on your business. And then the other thing too, I would say, is probably around like risk, in the sense of if they can essentially bankrupt you by just taking away their business, that's usually a pretty big telltale sign too.
But isn't that the most of most independent contractors? Like if I'm a one truck, one trailer kind of driver, and I'm working with C.H. Robinson, and I do most of their work, and I'm only on their job boards and taking all their freight. Am I an independent contractor? If they pull away all that freight from me and I lose out, like I don't see the distinction there as much.
Yeah, well, I guess an IC with a like tractor trailer is kind of like, you don't necessarily have a contract for like volume commitments or for performance standards per se, right? Like, the carriers are part of like the C.H. Robinson portfolio, for example. They typically have the instructions that are generic and reasonable for the type of work that any carrier would do. The load boards are interesting just because of the fact that they're posted, so people can choose to engage with them or not. Amazon, on the other hand, is that like, you make all of these investments, and then it's like, hey, you are working Monday through Friday, you are working Monday through Sunday, you do have to cover and do deliveries from this time to this time. You will get this much volume, and it's expected you maintain these SLAs. Like there's a very different level of engagement, because think about any LTL or FTL kind of activity, especially FTL. Guy picks up, takes it from origin to destination. Like, other than being late and stuff, like CH isn't telling the guy like when he has to stop, or like that he's got to be here at exactly this time. Like, it really just becomes about the start and finish more than anything else. But I would say that
it would depend on the run too, and depends what you're running. If you're running high value good that's expedited, they have a lot more. Again, it depends on what you're doing. And I would argue, like, if the Amazon, and again, I'm playing a little bit devil's advocate here, but on the Amazon guy, can I, as the independent contractor, if I hired someone else to do that run for me, can I go do something else and someone else is doing that run under my company? I don't think it's that individual that has to do it for Amazon. It's that company that they hired.
But yeah, but again, the DSPs are like, they have multiple people, right? So they engage with a DSP, and then that DSP hires everybody. Like, they're not beholden to, or they're not expected to be the one that's on the run. I would agree that I think you could probably get into some similar situations, like in standard transportation, for example. Like, if you were doing regular Monday to Friday, let's call it style work, where you were doing milk run type activity on a regular basis and just for one company. But again, usually it comes down to the fact that, can you negotiate? Can you, discuss terms, whether it be, days of work, hours of work, rates, things like that. There's no chance that any of these people can negotiate that with Amazon.
Adrian, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, he pretty much hit the nail on the head. And so at Ground, what they did is, that's why they started focusing on a lot more multi-route drivers. That's what they wanted, versus just single route, single van. And that kind of influenced the whole DSP thing. And so they went after that because there's still a company out there that has drivers that are 100% employees, and all the trucks are company owned, and that's UPS. However, they're unionized, and that scares a lot of these companies. It keeps them up at night.
Yeah. John, thoughts? Because we're down to the last. We're past our 2-minute mark.
We are past. I know we're late today. Yeah, no. Should be an interesting week. I think everybody. I'm curious to see how things start going with everyone as we get into September. Right, summer lull is coming off. Peak season is definitely going to be ramping up. Lots of activity. We had that great webcast last week. Or was it the week before? I'm losing track of time. Last week. But yeah, so I think it'll be really interesting to see what's going on, and everyone sort of coming out of that, sort of summer haze and vacation period, and everyone getting back to work. School starts next week. If for a lot of us, I know it started already in the US for a lot of places and certain school boards. So lots of activity. Lots of activity going on, and see what people are planning for, because the pressure on costs and performance is getting higher very quickly.
Adrian, thanks for joining us, by the way, and adding those words of wisdom for us and engaging. One thing I would echo on John's kind of comments is, it's not only back to school, but it's Labor Day, usually indicating the fourth quarter. That was part of the conversation that we were having last week with Jessica on our podcast. Is, hey, fourth quarter is around the corner. Be prepared for it. It's going to be a hectic one with a little bit of challenges. I thought it was going to be a bit soft. I don't know what to say anymore. I don't have a crystal ball, but I think, to John's point, we gotta be prepared for anything. Do some dry runs in your mind of how we can better get ready for some of the chaos that's coming our way. And then I think we would have a lot of interesting things to occur besides these labor disputes, because we have a few more coming up with Air Canada, like we said, with the ports. So we might have a challenging fourth quarter if those do take off. Again, thanks everybody for joining us. As always, anybody always has a question or wants to raise, or shoot us a message of topics they want to talk about. I know Nancy a few weeks ago asked us to talk a little bit more about sales and how to do the sales aspects, and we're still working on that. yeah, John, any final thoughts and closure thoughts on that aspect?
No, I'm good. I'm gonna spend the week kind of trying to get caught up on some stuff and playing with these new toys that I bought and came in over the weekend. So
Green screens, guys, you'll see a lot of videos coming from John, floating heads, a lot of different things. He's transforming into, what is it, Demure? What's the word?
oh my god, no! And that was a terrible. That was such a terrible example of you sent me. Why not to do it? Like that just reinforced that little trending meme. But actually, yeah, no, kind of cool. So the one last night was done with it. I got a Walmart one coming out tomorrow. It's just fun. It's interesting to see how easy tech has become. You know, talk to the kids, and I'm like, you guys have no idea how hard this used to be, or how next to impossible for a person and not a company or a studio to do it. And
Yep.
now you can do it, like, you know, with very, very little actual investment. It's crazy.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Bye.
Bye.